He was massive. That's how Ingrid Bergman described him. Not in a headline, not on a talk show, but quietly, almost reverently, in her private memoir. And no, she wasn't just talking about height. When a woman like Ingrid, who had worked alongside legends and defied the entire Hollywood machine, chooses a word like that, it carries weight. It's not flattery. It's not theater. It's confession. Most knew her as the luminous face behind Casablanca, the poised and powerful figure who brought dignity and danger to the screen in equal measure. But there was a side of Ingrid Bergman that was rarely shown to the public. A side filled with longing, scandal, artistic rebellion, and a deep emotional ache that pulsed beneath the surface of her carefully curated legacy. In the pages of her memoir, she opened a door that had been shut for decades, and behind that door was one man. Gregory Peck. Yes, he was tall, broad, towering, even. But that wasn't what left her breathless. What overwhelmed her, what silenced her mid-scene and rewired her understanding of presence, was something deeper, something spiritual. She wrote that he didn't just walk into a room, he filled it, not with noise or ego, but with stillness, with grace, with an invisible kind of gravity that pulled everything toward him, including her. And here's where it gets truly startling. This wasn't a romantic confession. It wasn't lust. It was something far more dangerous. Reverence. Because what she revealed about Gregory Peck said just as much about her own hidden desires, regrets, and emotional truths as it did about the man himself. Ingrid Bergman was never one to play by the rules. Not in life, not in love, and certainly not in death. But what she revealed in her final memoir was so personal, so quietly devastating, that it made even her most scandalous roles look tame. And the truth behind those 3 words, "He was massive," might change the way you see her forever. Long before the fame, the lights, and the whispered scandals, Ingrid Bergman was just a little girl surrounded by silence. Born in 1915 in Stockholm, she entered the world already marked by sorrow. Her mother died when Ingrid was just 3 years old, a wound too big for a child to understand. And as if fate wasn't finished, her father, a gentle photographer who nurtured her love for images and expression, passed away when she was 12. Just like that, she was orphaned. Most would have crumbled, but Ingrid didn't. She went inward, shy, observant, quietly intense. She found comfort not in people, but in performance. It was the stage that saved her. The moment she stepped into a character, she wasn't broken anymore. She was powerful. She trained at Stockholm's Royal Dramatic Theatre School, the same hallowed ground that shaped Greta Garbo. But Ingrid wasn't trying to become anyone else. Even in her earliest performances, there was something raw about her. She didn't pretend to feel emotion, she became it. Her pain wasn't hidden behind technique. It was used, transformed. Swedish cinema took notice. Her naturalism was electric, subtle but impossible to ignore. She didn't need to chase the camera, it came to her. And by the time she starred in the 1936 film Intermezzo, it was clear, this wasn't just another pretty face on screen. This was someone who had lived through things she would never fully explain. Someone who carried quiet grief like an accessory no one could see but everyone could feel. Her early rise was fast, but it was never easy. Behind every success was the shadow of a childhood stolen too soon. And that pain, it never left her. It just followed quietly, like a second soul, waiting to resurface when the lights went out. When Ingrid Bergman arrived in Hollywood, she didn't fit the mold, and that's exactly why she shattered it. It was 1939, and producer David O. Selznick had brought her over for the American remake of Intermezzo. Unlike the glamorous, highly stylized actresses of the day, Ingrid was something else entirely. Her beauty was soft, her accent was gentle, and her performances, they felt real, sometimes painfully so. Audiences didn't just watch Ingrid, they felt her. On screen, she carried a kind of vulnerability that made people lean in. And in a town that thrived on illusion, she offered something dangerously honest. Then came Casablanca. She was cast opposite Humphrey Bogart in what would become one of the most iconic love stories in film history. As Ilse Lund, she wasn't just a woman torn between 2 men, she was the emotional anchor of an entire generation. Her face, lit by the soft glow of Rick's Cafe, became timeless. But it wasn't just her looks. It was the sadness behind her eyes. The silent wars she waged on screen mirrored the real ones she carried off of it. In the years that followed, Ingrid's reputation grew, but not because she played it safe. She took risks. In Gaslight, she played a woman being psychologically unraveled, and won her first Academy Award. In Hitchcock's Notorious, she was seductive, tortured, morally conflicted. No one else brought that kind of emotional precision to the screen. She wasn't America's sweetheart. She was too complex for that. She was the actress you couldn't figure out, but couldn't stop watching. And while studios marketed glamour, Ingrid delivered truth. But just as her career reached its peak, she made a choice that would upend everything, and reveal the one thing Hollywood could never control: her heart. Ingrid Bergman was on top of the world, until she fell in love. Not with another actor, or a studio executive, but with someone far more dangerous, a visionary Italian director named Roberto Rossellini. And she didn't just fall for him, she followed him. At the time, she was still married to Peter Lindstrom, a respected neurosurgeon and the father of her daughter, Pia. From the outside, their life looked stable, respectable, safe. But behind the scenes, Ingrid was changing. Hollywood's golden girl had grown restless. She wanted more than applause. She wanted truth, on screen and off. She found it in Rossellini. Their affair began while she was still under contract in America, and when it came to light, the fallout was nuclear. Ingrid, the same woman who once embodied grace and moral virtue, was suddenly labeled a homewrecker. Headlines turned on her. The U.S. Senate even denounced her. Talk show hosts called her a bad influence. She hadn't just broken a marriage. She'd broken the illusion that Hollywood carefully protected. When she gave birth to Rossellini's child, Isabella, the outrage reached a fever pitch. America turned its back. The Academy closed its doors. And just like that, Ingrid was exiled from the very system she once ruled. But here's what most people missed. She wasn't ashamed. She didn't hide. She married Rossellini and moved to Italy, choosing art over comfort and truth over reputation. Together, they created films that were raw, experimental, and way ahead of their time. They also had 2 more children, Roberto and Isata, before their marriage ultimately collapsed. By the time she returned to America in Anastasia, the industry forgave her, but not entirely. The scandal never really went away. It followed her like a scar. And yet, Ingrid never apologized for it. Because for her, the real betrayal would have been pretending. Years after the scandals, after the exile, after the world tried to shrink her down to size, Ingrid Bergman wrote something unexpected. In a quiet passage of her memoir, she described a man in just 3 words: he was massive. The man, Gregory Peck. But this wasn't gossip. It wasn't some long-buried romantic fling. It was something far more intimate, and harder to explain. Yes, Gregory Peck was physically imposing. Tall, broad-shouldered, the very definition of Hollywood masculinity. But that's not what left her breathless. Ingrid had stood beside Bogart, Cary Grant, and dozens of icons. What shook her wasn't Peck's size, it was his stillness. She said he didn't walk into a room, he changed it. Without raising his voice or claiming the spotlight, he shifted the atmosphere. There was a gravity to him, a quiet intensity that drew people in and kept them there. You couldn't lie to him, she wrote. Not because he intimidated you, but because he made you want to be honest. On set, she found herself forgetting her lines, not out of nerves, but because she was transfixed. She called it reverence, a kind of emotional surrender to a man who never asked for it, but somehow deserved it anyway. There was no scandal, no affair, just 2 people orbiting each other in complete emotional clarity. She admired him deeply, and in doing so, revealed more about herself than she may have realized. Peck became a mirror, showing her the kind of grace and moral strength she longed to embody. Ingrid had loved passionately. She'd rebelled, risked, and endured. But with Gregory, there was no need to perform. Just presence. And when she said massive, she meant it in every way that matters: spirit, soul, and the kind of quiet power that lingers long after the credits roll. While the world remembered her for the role she played, Ingrid Bergman was quietly fighting a role she never asked for, one that would test every ounce of strength she had left. It started during a stage run of The Constant Wife in London. In the middle of rehearsals, with critics circling and tickets selling out, she found something far more pressing than applause, a small, hard lump under her left breast. She didn't panic. She acted. On June 15, 1974, Ingrid underwent surgery at a private clinic in London. There was no press release, no dramatic farewell. She simply vanished from the spotlight for a few weeks, and most assumed she was just resting. But behind closed doors, her real battle had begun. The operation was successful, at least for a while. But cancer doesn't always stay gone. Years later, while filming Autumn Sonata, one of the most emotionally raw roles of her career, Ingrid felt that same ominous sensation again. This time, the stakes were higher. The disease had returned, and it was spreading. Yet still, she didn't stop. She flew back to London for another surgery, then returned to the set almost immediately. It wasn't stubbornness, it was devotion. She believed in finishing what she started, even if her body was begging her to rest. She poured everything she had left into her final projects: Waters of the Moon, A Woman Called Golda, roles that demanded more than talent. They demanded her soul. Her face had changed, her strength was waning. But her fire never flickered. Even while undergoing treatments, even as the pain intensified, Ingrid showed up. Every scene, every line, every look, delivered with precision and pride. She refused to let illness define her legacy, and no one watching her on screen would have ever guessed she was running out of time. By the late 1970s, the world had all but crowned Ingrid Bergman a living legend. She had survived exile, endured scandal, and conquered her craft on both sides of the Atlantic. But even legends have limits, and hers was quietly approaching. After filming her final major role in A Woman Called Golda, Ingrid stepped away from the spotlight and retreated to a modest flat in London's serene Chelsea neighborhood, in a building nestled along Cheyne Walk. It was peaceful there, quiet, leafy, and far removed from the glare of paparazzi flashbulbs. But even in that stillness, the world wouldn't quite let her go. Every day, photographers waited on the sidewalk below, hoping to capture even the smallest glimpse of her through the windows. They didn't know, couldn't have known, that behind those curtains, Ingrid was dying. The cancer had returned with force. This time, it had spread beyond the breast and into her spine, collapsing her 12th vertebrae and leaving her in constant, almost unbearable pain. Her right lung had stopped functioning entirely, and only a small portion of the left remained intact. But still, she refused to make a spectacle of her decline. Even in her frailest moments, Ingrid was deliberate, never letting the world see her suffer. She avoided the front window. She asked visitors to come quietly. She remained elegant even when the illness stripped her body of strength, choosing silk robes over hospital gowns, classical music over hospital monitors. And through it all, she never complained. Those closest to her said she handled the pain with a stoic grace that bordered on the surreal. She continued reading, writing, even rehearsing lines from memory just to keep her mind sharp. She didn't rage against death. She simply met it with eyes open. On the evening of August 28, 1982, a small circle gathered at her bedside: her ex-husband Lars Schmidt, whom she had divorced years earlier but remained close with, and a few dear friends. They toasted her life with quiet laughter and tearful smiles, clinking glasses in the soft candlelight. Ingrid was alert, present. She even smiled. It was her 67th birthday. Just after midnight, she passed away. There was no press conference, no dramatic final words, just a silence that settled over the room like snow. Her body was gone, but her presence lingered. In the chair beside her bed lay a worn, open copy of The Little Prince, a book she treasured for its reflections on love, loss, and the invisible things that matter most. When news of her passing broke, it was like the world had lost its breath. Fans gathered outside her building. Flowers were left at her door. And in October, over 1,200 mourners filled the pews at London's historic St. Martin-in-the-Fields Church. The service was dignified, restrained, just as she would have wanted. Shakespeare was read. Music from Casablanca played softly beneath the tears. And among the crowd, her grandson, Justin Daly, watched it all unfold, shocked, overwhelmed, and quietly transformed. He later said that in that moment, as reporters shoved cameras into the air and strangers wept in the aisles, he realized something simple and profound. Ingrid Bergman no longer belonged to just him. She belonged to everyone. To film, to history, to the world. When the dust finally settled, after the affairs, the exile, the awards, the final curtain calls, what remained of Ingrid Bergman wasn't the scandal. It wasn't the gossip. It was something far more enduring. Truth. For all the time she was judged, punished and shunned, Ingrid never changed who she was to win back approval. She didn't chase redemption. She simply lived, bravely, unapologetically, and without compromise. And that's what made her unforgettable. She had been exiled by Hollywood, only to return and win her second Oscar. She'd been labeled a disgrace, only to become a global icon. At every stage of her life, she proved that a woman could be brilliant, flawed, passionate, and fearless, and still worthy of love. Her artistry was never about perfection. It was about honesty. Whether she was playing a tormented wife in Gaslight, a torn lover in Casablanca, or a dying prime minister in A Woman Called Golda, there was always something real beneath the performance. She let audiences in, not to show them glamour, but to show them pain, strength, humanity. And when she wrote about Gregory Peck, when she called him massive, it wasn't just admiration for a man. It was an echo of everything she had chased her entire life: substance, presence, integrity. In naming what she saw in him, she revealed what she valued most in herself. Today, no one talks about the Senate resolution or the tabloid headlines. They talk about the woman who changed acting forever. The woman who stood up, spoke out, and made no apologies for the life she lived. Ingrid Bergman didn't just survive Hollywood. She outgrew it. Ingrid Bergman's story was never just about stardom. It was about the cost of being real in a world built on illusion. She didn't always make the easy choices. She followed her heart even when it shattered her public image. She chased roles that frightened her. She spoke truths that made people uncomfortable. And in doing so, she became something greater than a movie star. She became a mirror. One that reflected our own contradictions, our longing for authenticity, and our quiet need to be seen. When she described Gregory Peck as massive, she wasn't praising ego or physicality. She was naming something rare, a depth of presence, a stillness that made noise seem small. In a life defined by upheaval and reinvention, that moment of clarity mattered. Because it showed us who she was, not just how she performed, but how she felt, what she saw, what moved her. And that's the thing about Ingrid. Even in her most vulnerable moments, whether facing public humiliation or private illness, she never lost her sense of self. She wasn't fearless. She just refused to let fear decide her future. Her legacy isn't built on perfection. It's built on truth. The kind that endures beyond headlines, beyond rumors, beyond even death. Her face will forever flicker on old screens. Her voice will echo in black and white. But her real story? That lives somewhere deeper, somewhere more human. So when you think of Ingrid Bergman, don't just remember the actress. Remember the woman, the rebel, the survivor, the artist who lived big, loved deeply, fell hard, stood tall, and never apologized for any of it. Because in the end, the most powerful thing about Ingrid Bergman was that she never stopped being massive in her own right.